Every single night my grandson Leo wanted me to read him The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And I did until the night my voice gave out. It was always easier to just do it than to hear him whine. That's what grandmothers do, right? At least that's what grandmothers like me did. My name is Jenny. I'm 70 years old, and I'm about to tell you the kind of story most women take to their graves. If you're new here, you might want to settle in. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about the weight of a lifetime of yes, and the one no that finally set me free. I spent most of my life, nearly 50 years, working at the A1 Textile Services, on the industrial side of town. You know the kind of place. Cavernous building, roaring machines that swallow mountains of sheets from hotels and uniforms from factories. The air always smelled of bleach and steam, a sharp, clean scent that clung to your clothes and your hair. My hands were a map of that life. Always red, always cracked, no matter how much lotion I slathered on. But that job put a roof over our heads and food on the table for decades. So I never complained. Not out loud, anyway. I had my daughter, Clara, when I was just 20. Her father, Frank, worked on the assembly line at the car plant. Handsome, with a smile that could melt your resolve. By the time I started showing, he'd gotten a great opportunity down in Georgia. Never even called to see if it was a boy or a girl. Just another man who saw a family as a burden instead of a blessing. Nothing unique about my story there. The women in my family, we don't get knights in shining armor. We get varicose veins and a deep, bone-tired understanding that we have to carry the load ourselves. From the very beginning, it was just me and Clara against the world. Our little house on Sycamore Street wasn't much, but I kept it clean. I worked double shifts, sometimes even a triple during the holidays when the hotels were full. The daycare woman, sweet old Mrs. Gable, would keep Clara late for an extra few dollars. Poor little thing, she'd say about my daughter. Never poor Eleanor. Nobody ever says poor thing about the mothers. We're just expected to be pillars, unfeeling and unbreakable. When Clara was small, she'd wait up for me. I can still picture her in those little footy pajamas, the ones with the ducks on them, sitting on the sofa fighting sleep. No matter how exhausted I was, my feet screaming, my back a solid knot of pain, I'd make her favorite, cinnamon sugar toast, cut into little soldiers. "You're the best mommy in the whole world," she'd mumble, her head drooping onto my shoulder. And for a moment, just a moment, all the exhaustion would lift. Funny, isn't it? How a few sleepy words from your child can make a lifetime of sacrifice feel worth it. Or maybe that's just the story we mothers tell ourselves so we can get up and do it all over again the next day. I never remarried. There was a man, Arthur, for a little while when Clara was in middle school. He was a kind man, a bus driver with gentle hands and a quiet laugh. But Clara, she would throw a fit whenever he came around. She'd slam her bedroom door, refuse to come out for dinner. "It's just you and me, Mom. We don't need anyone else," she'd say, her little face set in a stubborn line. And fool that I was, I believed her. I let Arthur go. I let anyone go who might have taken even a sliver of attention away from my girl. Clara was bright. Her teachers always said she had potential. But somewhere along the way, that potential curdled into something else. Into expectations. Her expectations of what I should do for her. By high school, she'd stopped making her own bed, stopped even clearing her plate from the table. "Mom, that's your job," she'd say, as if I were simple for suggesting otherwise. And I let her think that. My fault, I suppose. When you spend years being someone's entire universe, you forget to teach them how to exist without you. The neighborhood changed. The good jobs left, then the good neighbors. The corner grocery became a pawn shop. My street, once lined with tidy houses and well-kept lawns, started to look tired and worn, just like me. I kept my head down, kept going to work. What else was there to do? Moving wasn't an option on my wages. And Clara never left home. Not for college, not for a job, not for a life of her own. "The economy's terrible, Mom," she'd say, as if she were the only one facing hard times. Meanwhile, I was getting older. The arthritis started in my fingers, a legacy of all those years handling wet, heavy linens. Then my knees began to ache, then my back. The doctor gave me pills that made my head fuzzy and did little to touch the deep, grinding pain. Still, I kept working. Kept cooking Clara's separate meals because she was a picky eater. Kept cleaning up after her. This grown woman who'd never learned to rinse a glass. "You're just better at it, Mom," she'd say with a smile that used to light up my world, but now just felt like another demand. She'd thought I was the whole world. And the world can't fail. The world can't get tired. The world can't break down. Even as I started using the furniture to help me walk from room to room, she didn't seem to notice. Or she didn't want to. When I'd wince lifting her laundry basket, she'd just say, "Getting old as the pits, huh, Mom?" Like it was a shared joke. Never once offered to carry it herself. I don't know when I realized I'd raised a daughter who couldn't see me as a person. Person who aches. Person who gets tired. A person who has a right to a life of her own. Maybe it was the night I found her going through my purse for my pain medication. Maybe it was when she screamed at me for buying the wrong kind of yogurt, as if I'd committed a mortal sin. Or maybe it was when I started lying in bed at night, fantasizing about the silence of an empty house, about what it would be like to only have to take care of myself for once. Terrible thoughts for a mother to have, aren't they? But there they were, growing louder and more insistent with every passing day. The thing about being needed is that it can feel like love when you're young enough and strong enough to provide. But as your body starts to fail, that need turns into a weight. A heavy, crushing weight that presses the air from your lungs and the spirit from your soul. I was disappearing. One favor, one mom do it for me at a time. And she never even saw me fading away. The final chapter began with my back. It had been a dull ache for years, a constant companion. But one Thursday morning, I bent down to pick up a magazine Clara had left on the floor. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple bend. And something inside me tore. A white-hot lightning bolt of pain shot from my lower back down my leg. I cried out, a short, sharp sound I didn't even recognize as my own, and crumpled to the floor. I couldn't move. I was pinned there by agony, lying on the scratchy hallway carpet, staring up at the water-stained ceiling. An hour later, Clara came out of her room yawning. She saw me there, a heap of pain on the floor. Her first words weren't, "Mom, what's wrong?" Or, "Are you okay?" She looked down at me and said, "What's for breakfast?" "I'm gonna be late." The coldness of it, the sheer, unseeing selfishness was more shocking than the pain. In that moment, the last veil fell away. I can't move, Clara. My back, I managed to gasp. She sighed and, exasperated, put upon sound. "Well, can you at least tell me where the cereal is?" She stepped over me, went to the kitchen, and I heard her rummaging in the cupboard. She left for work without helping me up, without calling a doctor, without a backward glance. I was just an inconvenient piece of furniture on her path. My neighbor Beatrice found me later. She helped me to the couch, clucking her tongue. "Eleanor, this is no good. No good at all." The doctor was grim. "Degenerative disc disease, Eleanor," he said, pointing at the X-ray as if I could understand the ghostly images. "Your spine is crumbling. If you keep lifting, keep straining it, you risk permanent nerve damage. You could end up in a wheelchair." He told me I had to stop working immediately, to apply for disability, to get help at home. I almost laughed in his kind, young face. Stop working? With what money? Get help at home? The only other person in my home was a 48-year-old child. I went home that evening, the doctor's warnings echoing in my head like a death knell. Clara was waiting. The internet was out. "Mom, you need to call the cable company. I can't deal with them." I set my purse down slowly, carefully. "Clara, we need to talk. The doctor says I can't work anymore. My back, it's very bad." Her face didn't shift to concern. It hardened into calculation. "So what does that mean? You're just going to quit? How are we supposed to pay the mortgage? Not how are you, Mom? Not what can I do? Just how does this affect me?" The conversation that followed was a masterclass in selfishness. My pain was an inconvenience. My potential paralysis was an unfair burden on her. She was a spectator in the collapse of my body, annoyed that the show was disrupting her schedule. The final straw came 2 days later. My new, stronger pain medication was gone from my bedside table. I knew instantly. I went to her room, my heart pounding with a sick dread. There it was in her top drawer, tucked between her socks. Half empty. She'd stolen the pills that made my existence barely tolerable. When I confronted her, she was defensive. "It's not a big deal. You can get more." "God, you're so dramatic." I looked at this woman, my daughter, my life's work. I saw the resentment in her eyes, the utter lack of empathy. And something in me, something that had been bending for nearly 50 years, finally snapped. "Get out," I said, my voice quiet but firm. She stared at me. "What?" "Get out of my house. I want you gone by the end of the week." The fight that ensued was ugly. She called me crazy, senile, a terrible mother. She said I'd be lost without her. But the truth was, I'd been lost with her. Lost inside the role of mom, with no room left for Eleanor. She left that Sunday. She packed her things in a fury, slamming doors, her car screeching away from the curb for the final time. And then silence. It was the most profound sound I had ever heard. I stood in the middle of my living room, alone, truly alone, for the first time since I was 20 years old. I waited for the guilt to crush me. I waited for the tears. But they didn't come. All I felt was a deep, spreading sense of peace. It was over. The constant demands, the ingratitude, the slow erosion of my soul. It was over. The first few weeks were a struggle, I won't lie. My body was broken. The disability process was a nightmare of paperwork and rejections. But for the first time, the fight was for me, not for her. Beatrice, my neighbor, became an unexpected ally. She started bringing over casseroles. "Don't be proud, Eleanor," she'd say. She dragged me to her weekly book club, a gathering of women my age with their own maps of pain and survival etched on their faces. There was Marjorie, a retired nurse with a wicked sense of humor, and Ruth, a tiny bird-like woman who had been a freedom rider in the 60s. They didn't pity me. They saw me. I learned to ask for help. Beatrice's nephew, a kind man named Paul, installed grab bars in my shower and a railing in my hallway. I started using the senior center's shuttle bus for my doctor's appointments. I joined an advocacy group for the elderly, stuffing envelopes and making phone calls. My world, which had shrunk to the size of my house and my daughter's needs, began to expand. I started painting. Watercolors. They were awful at first, just blurry, childish shapes. But it was something that was mine. No one was telling me how to do it. No one was judging the result. It was a pure, simple act of creation, and it brought a quiet joy I hadn't felt in decades. I redecorated the house. I got rid of the old stained sofa and bought a small, comfortable armchair in a cheerful yellow. I painted the walls a soft, calming lavender. I planted a window box with bright red geraniums. The house stopped being a monument to my sacrifice and started becoming a home for me. It's been a year now. The disability finally came through. It's a pittance, but it's enough. My back still aches every single day. Some days are bad and I don't get out of bed. But the pain is my pain. It's not compounded by the agony of being taken for granted. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Clara found an apartment. She has a new job. I don't know if she's happy. I don't know if she's changed. A part of me will always love the little girl in the duck pajamas. But I don't miss the woman she became. I survived the lie that love means endless self-sacrifice. I found a fragile, hard-won peace. And I learned at 70 years old that it is never ever too late to choose yourself. If this story of a stubborn old granny resonated with you, well, there are more where that came from. Subscribe if you'd like to hear them. My name is Jenny, and I'm just getting started. The silence, once a novelty, began to take on different textures. There was the peaceful morning silence, accompanied by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the chirping of sparrows outside my window. I cherished that one. Then there was the afternoon silence, heavy and expectant, when the light slanted through the dusty living room and I'd find myself staring at the door, half expecting it to burst open with Clara's latest crisis. The hardest was the evening silence. For 50 years my evenings had been a rhythm of dinner preparation, the clatter of dishes, the background noise of a television show I wasn't watching. Now the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock my own father had left me. Its steady, sonorous tock 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 felt like it was counting down the remainder of my life, each chime a reminder of the emptiness. I started talking to the ghosts in the house. Not real ghosts, mind you, but memories. I'd pass the hall closet and see the little scuff marks where Clara used to kick off her tiny rain boots. I'd look at the worn spot on the kitchen linoleum where I'd stood for thousands of hours, packing lunches, scrubbing pots, waiting for a pot to boil. The house was a museum of my servitude, and I was the lone curator. One Tuesday I decided to exorcise a ghost. I went into Clara's old room. It wasn't her room anymore, not really. It was a storage space for her discarded life. A dusty ballet recital trophy sat on the windowsill. A faded poster of a boy band was still tacked to the wall, the boys' smiles looking brittle and dated. In the closet I found a box of her old school projects. Macaroni art. A diorama of the solar system with Pluto still proudly included. A Mother's Day card written in wobbly cursive. To the best mom in the world. I sat on the floor, my bad back protesting, and read that card. The words that had once filled me with purpose now felt like an accusation. Had I been the best mom? I'd given her everything. But in doing so, had I forgotten to give her a mother who knew how to say no? A mother who showed her that a woman's worth wasn't solely in her sacrifice? I didn't throw the card away. I placed it back in the box along with the other artifacts. But I didn't leave the room as I found it. I called Paul, Beatrice's nephew. "Paul," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in months. "I need your help. I want to turn this room into a painting studio." It was time to make new ghosts. Transforming the room was a physical and spiritual purge. Paul cleared out the old furniture, patched the holes in the walls, and installed a sturdy, adjustable easel. Beatrice helped me pick out a cheerful sunshine yellow paint for the walls. "It's bold, Eleanor," she'd said, and I'd agreed. The first time I stood in that bright, empty room, with a blank canvas on the easel and a brand new set of acrylics waiting, I felt a thrill of pure terror. What right did a 70-year-old woman with gnarled hands have to create something beautiful? Marjorie from the book club, the retired nurse, stopped by. She took one look at my paralyzed stance and snorted. "For heaven's sake, Eleanor, it's paint, not plutonium. Just slap some on. If you hate it, you can paint over it. That's the magic of it." So I did. I chose a color called vermilion. It was a red so bold it almost hurt to look at. I loaded my brush and made a great sweeping slash across the pristine white canvas. It was messy. It was uncontrolled. It was glorious. I didn't paint a thing. I painted a feeling. The vermilion was my rage. A deep cobalt blue became my sadness. A vibrant emerald green was the tentative hope I was starting to feel. I painted for hours until the light faded and my back screamed in protest. I ended up with a canvas that was a chaotic, swirling mess of color. It wasn't good by any standard, but it was honest. It was the first completely honest thing I had made in 50 years. I hung it on the wall of my new studio. It was my declaration of independence, painted in vermilion. The knock on the door 3 weeks later was firm and unfamiliar. It wasn't Beatrice's friendly tap-tap-tap, or the mailman's brisk rap. I peered through the peephole and felt my heart stutter. It was a man in a crisp, dark suit. He looked official. My mind raced. Was it about the disability? Had I filled out a form wrong? Was it a bill collector? I opened the door a crack, the chain still on. "Jenny?" he asked, his voice polite but impersonal. "Yes. My name is Mr. Albright. I'm from the law firm of Henderson and Gray." He held up a business card. "I was hoping to have a word with you regarding your former place of employment, A1 Textile Services." Curiosity overpowered my fear. I unchained the door and let him in. He sat primly on the edge of my yellow armchair, a stark contrast to its cheerfulness. He explained that a former coworker of mine, A woman named Juanita from the sheets department had passed away 6 months ago. Occupational lung disease. In going through her effects, her family had discovered she'd been part of a nascent effort to unionize the plant decades ago. She'd kept meticulous notes about safety violations, exposure to chemicals without proper protection, and the company's deliberate ignoring of repetitive stress injuries. A class action lawsuit is being prepared, Mrs. Vance, Mr. Albright said calmly, on behalf of all former employees who suffered lasting physical harm due to the company's negligence. Your name came up repeatedly in Juanita's notes. She listed you as someone with severe spinal deterioration. I was stunned. Juanita. I remembered her. A fierce, funny woman who always shared her tamales during lunch. She'd driven me to the hospital when I was in labor with Clara. She tried to get me to join the union effort, but I'd been too scared, too focused on just keeping my head down in my job. And all those years she'd been watching out for me, even in her notes. Tears welled in my eyes. Not for the potential lawsuit, but for Juanita. For her quiet solidarity. For all the women like us, broken by the machinery of other people's profit. I have the paperwork here, Mr. Albright said, pulling a thick envelope from his briefcase. It would involve sharing your medical records, giving a deposition. It could be a long process. I thought of my crooked hands. I thought of the lightning pain in my back that woke me most nights. I thought of Juanita, whose lungs had finally given out. Where do I sign? I asked, my voice clear and strong. The paperwork was a mountain. Mr. Albright had been right. It meant reliving every ache, every doctor's visit, every moment of pain. It meant digging up old W-2s and tax returns, forcing me to look at the paltry sum I'd earned for a lifetime of breaking my body. It was a reckoning, not just with the company but with myself. Filling out those forms, I had to assign a value to my suffering. I had to quantify the cost of my silence. It was infuriating and cathartic all at once. The book club women became my unofficial board of advisors. Marjorie helped me decipher medical jargon. Ruth, the former activist, was thrilled. It's about time they were held accountable, she'd say, pumping her tiny fist. Beatrice kept me supplied with tea and moral support. I was no longer just Eleanor, the retired laundry worker. I was Eleanor, the plaintiff. I was fighting back. The feeling was intoxicating. It was during this time that I got the call. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Mom. It was Clara. Her voice was small, tentative. My entire body went rigid. Clara. A long pause. I heard. About the lawsuit. Someone from the old neighborhood saw your name in the paper. So that was it. It wasn't me she was calling about. It was the potential of money. I see, I said, my voice flat. Look, Mom. I'm happy for you. Really. Maybe we could have lunch? Talk things over. The old patterns tugged at me. The desire to smooth things over, to make peace, to have my daughter back. But I was different now. I had a studio with a vermilion slash on the wall. I had a lawsuit to fight. I had a life. Now is not a good time, Clara, I said, surprising myself with my calm. I have a great deal going on. Right. Of course. Her voice was tight with disappointment. Well, maybe another time. Maybe, I said and hung up. I stood holding the phone for a long time, waiting for the guilt to wash over me. It came, but it was a small wave, not a tsunami. I had weathered it. I had held my boundary, and I was still standing. Inspired by the lawsuit and the memory of my old friend, I decided to start a new painting. This one would be a portrait. I would paint Juanita. I had no photograph of her. I had to paint her from memory. I started with her eyes. She'd had kind, tired eyes that always seemed to be laughing at a secret joke. I painted her hands, which were strong and capable, much like mine had been. I painted her in our break room, sitting on a plastic chair, holding one of her homemade tamales. It was the most difficult thing I'd ever attempted. Getting the likeness right, capturing the spirit of a person, felt like a sacred task. I worked on it for weeks, losing track of time, my back pain fading into the background as I focused on the curve of a smile, the fold of a uniform. When I finally put my brush down, I knew it was finished. It wasn't a perfect likeness, I was sure. But it was her. I had captured her resilience, her quiet strength. I had painted a monument to a friendship I had been too busy to properly appreciate at the time. I showed it to the book club. They were silent for a long moment. "Oh, Eleanor," Beatrice finally whispered, her eyes glistening. "You've captured her soul." In that moment, I wasn't a plaintiff or a mother or a victim. I was an artist. And it was enough. Months turned into a year. The lawsuit crawled through the legal system at a glacial pace. My life, however, was moving forward. I had a routine. Painting in the mornings, book club or advocacy work in the afternoons, quiet evenings with a book or on the phone with one of my new friends. One ordinary Tuesday, a thick envelope arrived from Henderson and Gray. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't the final settlement, Mr. Albright explained in his covering letter. That would take more time. This was an interim disbursement, a partial payment based on the strength of the initial evidence, to help the plaintiffs with medical bills and living expenses. I unfolded the check. The number made my knees go weak. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. More than I'd made in any 5 years at the laundry combined. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat down heavily in my yellow armchair and stared at the piece of paper. It represented validation. It was an admission in cold hard cash that my pain had value. That my life's work had worth beyond the meager paycheck I'd received. The first thing I did was write a check to Paul for all the work he'd done, paying him double what he'd asked for. The second thing I did was call Beatrice. "Beatrice," I said, my voice shaking only a little, "put on your best hat. We're going to the Oak Room for lunch." The Oak Room was the fanciest restaurant in our tired little city, a place I had only ever walked past. We made an event of it. Beatrice, Marjorie, Ruth, and I. We dressed up. I wore a dress I hadn't put on in a decade and a string of pearls that had been my mother's. We walked into the hushed, dark wood dining room, for old ladies turning heads. The waiter was young and impeccably polite. He didn't condescend to us. He treated us like the queens we felt like that day. We ordered things we couldn't pronounce. We drank a bottle of champagne that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. We laughed. We told stories. We celebrated my small victory, but it felt like a victory for all of us. For every woman who had been overlooked, underpaid, and worn down. Sitting there, surrounded by the clink of fine crystal and the murmur of conversation, I felt a sense of belonging I had never known. This wasn't the life I was supposed to have. It was better. It was a life I had built for myself, from the ashes of the one that had burned down. With part of the money, I decided to tackle the backyard. It had been a neglected patch of dirt and weeds for years, a symbol of all the things I'd never had time for. I hired a landscaper, a young woman named Lily with muscles like corded rope and dirt perpetually under her fingernails. Together we designed a garden. Not a fussy, formal one, but a cottage garden, full of things that bloomed and spilled and smelled wonderful. We planted lavender for its calming scent, sturdy sunflowers that reached for the sky, and climbing roses that would, in time, cover the rickety old fence. We put in a small, stone bird bath and a proper bench where I could sit with my morning coffee. It was an act of faith. Planting something you may not see reach its full glory is a bet on the future. It was me saying, I plan to be here. I plan to watch this grow. As Lily and I placed the last lavender plant in the soil, my hands caked in rich, dark earth, I felt a profound connection to the world. I was nurturing something again, but this time it was for no one's benefit but my own and the bees and the birds. It was a quiet, generative act free from obligation. The letter came on a bright spring morning. The garden was beginning to show signs of life, with green shoots pushing confidently through the soil. The letter was from Clara. It wasn't a note scrawled on a piece of paper. It was a formal embossed invitation. Clara Evans requests the pleasure of your company at her wedding to Mr. Daniel Miller on Saturday, the 18th of June. I sat on my garden bench, the expensive cardstock feeling alien in my hand. A wedding. She was getting married. To a man I had never met. A whirlwind of emotions assaulted me. Hurt that I was hearing about it this way. Curiosity about this Daniel. A deep maternal longing to see my little girl in a white dress. And a cold, hard knot of caution. This was a test. A test of my new boundaries. Was this an olive branch or a summons back to my old role? I brought the invitation to book club that week. I laid it on the coffee table amidst the cheese and crackers. The room fell silent. "Oh my," Ruth said finally. "What are you going to do, Eleanor?" Marjorie asked, ever practical. "I don't know," I admitted. "A part of me wants to go. To see her. To know she's found someone." "And the other part?" Beatrice asked gently. "The other part remembers being stepped over on the floor. The other part remembers stolen pills. The other part is afraid that if I walk back into her world, I'll disappear again." I looked at the faces of my friends, these women who had become my chosen family. They didn't offer easy answers. They just listened. That night I sat in my studio, looking from the chaotic, emotional Vermilion painting to the serene, dignified portrait of Juanita. I had contained multitudes. I could be the mother who longed for her daughter, and the woman who protected her own hard-won peace. I didn't know what I would do. But for the first time I knew the decision was entirely unequivocally mine. And that in itself was a victory.